What's up guys, welcome back. This is anime fiction. You'll be watching What If Naruto Fused with the Mind Stone in Marvel, Part 7. Now, let's begin. Edward Buckman felt a surge of triumph as he witnessed the deftness with which he had swayed the masses regarding the mutants. He watched with a heavy heart as indifference settled over the crowd, their eyes blind to the lurking threat of the mutants. It took little more than a few words from Shaw, a gentle nudge, to steer them back to reality. They were reminded, once again, of the ticking time bomb that moved among them, a silent danger they could no longer afford to ignore. He might have felt a surge of joy about the entire affair, were it not for a single, troubling detail he learned amidst the chaos of his futile experiments and the Avengers' clash. The Avengers had taken possession of Weapon H and X-23. He felt a deep sense of shock upon discovering the truth, understanding that it was the Avengers who had obliterated Ross military base in Nevada. They had undermined their coalition, leaving a trail of destruction by eliminating the key officials and the scientists who led the experiments. They not only obliterated one of his facilities, but they also shattered the hope of reviving Stryker's former research into the creation of indomitable soldiers. And then came the end of Norman Osborn. Considering the way the first two events unfolded, he had no doubt that the Avengers were also behind Osborn's demise. If he had merely lost two specimens from two significant experiments, he might have shrugged off the loss. But in this instance, he lost not only his cherished possessions but also every fragment of data tied to those studies and inquiries. The loss weighed heavily, a burden too great to bear. The threefold decline of his investments compelled the postponement of his Project Armageddon, leaving it suspended in uncertainty. Cursed Avengers. He felt no concern for the discovery of his role in those experiments, confident that no trace would remain of his participation. Yet, a different worry gnawed at him: how the Avengers would respond if he urged some of his allies in the Senate to seek custody of the two of them. Taking such an action would surely signal to them that someone entangled in those cruel experiments was plotting a return. At this moment, I have lost all concern. The Avengers find themselves nearing the end of their strength, destined to be restrained like the children from the Baxter Building. He could bide his time, but there lingered the possibility that they might vanish, much like Bruce Banner had for nearly 10 years, leaving his work to drift away like dust in the breeze, or worse, someone else might seize it before he had the chance. To toil in the shadows carries its burdens. Each move is bound by unseen chains, limiting the freedom of every choice made. Isn't it wiser to seize them now rather than risk losing them when the Avengers fall apart? Yet, one must consider, it is the Avengers. He mused aloud, gazing at the vibrant city nightlife from his office. Moments. It was enough for the Avengers to quell the turmoil brought by the rampaging mutants, and they did so without the presence of Tony Stark, Thor, and the Hulk. They were not a disheveled group like those pretenders to justice who fancied themselves as saviors. Each of them was a valuable asset that any rational military force desired, and together they constituted a formidable organization that made the American government exceedingly wary. For Buckman, the weight of his Project Armageddon bore down on him, leaving no room for passivity. He could not foresee the actions the Avengers might take if pushed too far by the government. He was a man of commerce, well versed in the art of recognizing those who would stand their ground, those who would resist with all their might when pressed. The Avengers were of that ilk, at least the ones he had encountered. Should I confide in Shaw? He shook his head at the thought. Trusting Shaw to a limited extent was one thing, but revealing every move was another. They were in business, and the pursuit of profit defined their very existence. He stood there, drink in hand, gazing at the imposing structure that loomed over the city, the word Stark boldly displayed across its facade. With a slight nod, he raised his glass in a silent salute. For the betterment of all. Raven Darkholm's perspective. Rage simmered within her as she took in the news that had spread like wildfire, its echoes haunting the air around her. For the first time in a long while, Magneto had sought her out, inquiring if she possessed any knowledge of the events that had transpired. She replied honestly, with no pretense she had not the faintest clue about what had occurred. Her anger stemmed not from the foolishness of the leaders, which was all too predictable, but from the consequences their decisions would bring upon the innocent mutants caught in the fray. She faced the world head-on, unyielding in her pursuit of the right to exist in this harsh and unforgiving place. What restrained her was the lack of resources. She stood apart from Eric, Charles, and even Emma. The strength she possessed seemed insignificant in the presence of these individuals. What sustained her through the years was her sharp mind and her knack for transformation. If she possessed even a fraction of the strength her two friends wielded, she believed she would have accomplished far more than they ever had. Watching interview after interview unfold, each one granting those spiteful souls a platform to voice their disdain for her kind, she found herself, in a fleeting moment of regret, wishing for a more formidable gift at birth. She left Charles for Eric, drawn by the strength and ambition that Eric possessed. He brought the change he sought, but in doing so, he became a shadow of himself. The men she once admired was now difficult to be around, and in the end, she chose to walk away. She understood that with the recent events unfolding, Eric would no longer linger in the background, but would step into the light. The world would soon witness the return of a formidable threat known as Magneto, and she was certain of it. She inhaled deeply, silencing the flickering screen, and sank back into the embrace of her couch. She took her phone in hand, opened the messages, and tapped on the name that read Naruto. Naruto, is it? What a damn irony. Tomorrow, when the school day comes to an end. She was uncertain of her feelings regarding the message and what it signified for her future. For the first time in many days, she chose to step forward and embrace the new change as much as her strength would permit. She was an enigma. The shifting mystery of existence. She embodied the relentless spirit of life, bending and shifting with the passage of time. She departed from Naruto's message and scrolled down, her gaze landing on the name of someone who held great significance in her life. She paused, weighing the decision to call her, but the risk loomed too large. She understood the depths of Magneto's paranoia and suspected that the Metalman had dispatched a couple of his underlings to watch her closely and relay her actions. Moreover, Naruto had meddled with her phone, inserting his contacts within it. She simply could not take that chance. It will only require some time. She murmured quietly and adjusted herself on the couch, her eyes closing as sleep enveloped her, carrying her away to the fleeting realm of dreams. The Baxter Building stood tall, a monument of stone and steel, its presence felt in the bustling city. It was a place where stories unfolded, where lives intersected, and where the weight of the world seemed to rest upon its shoulders. The members of the Fantastic Four wore solemn expressions as they watched the news reports of mutant settlements being revealed and engulfed in flames. This is not how it should be. Ben spoke through clenched jaws as they observed a grotesque father, his slitted reptilian eyes fixed on the scene, using his own body as a shield for a child no older than 6, marked by a tail and patches of scales that told a story of their own. None of you can convince me this is just. Though he bore a tough facade, he possessed a kindness that shone through, both within the team and among those he encountered beyond it. It is a sorrowful truth, stark and unyielding, that our options are painfully limited. Reed spoke, his face marked by a hint of regret. At Reed's words, Ben let out a scoff, irritation etched across his face. Is that so? And whose blame does that fall upon? Let's not do this now, my friends. Johnny sought to calm Ben, hoping to prevent the situation from growing worse and deepening the rift between them. He regarded Ben, attempting to speak to him with a gentle clarity. Regrettably, my friend, Reed has the truth on his side this time. We are powerless in this moment. Their stance in this entire situation was somewhat uncomfortable, which only deepened their predicament as their actions were limited. We may find ourselves powerless, yet I am certain of one thing: I will not affix my name to any document if those scoundrels allow such a thing to transpire. Ben rose, his footsteps weighted, and moved away into the distance. The living room was steeped in an uneasy quiet, each person grappling with the weight of Ben's sudden words, unsure of how to break the stillness that hung heavy in the air. You've been rather silent, Sue. What troubles your thoughts? Johnny glanced at his sister, who had, unusually, kept her silence during it all. Startled from her reverie, Sue gestures dismissively, as if the matter held no weight, prompting Johnny to merely shrug and let it go. Sue, trapped within her own thoughts, wrestled with a question that echoed in the minds of many after the recent chaos of the carnival. What should I do now? From the perspective of Naruto. I sat on a bench by the lake, the water calm and reflective, beside a middle-aged Asian woman who shared the space in silence. We lingered in silence for a few moments, observing the fleeting figures and the rare joggers, until Mystique shattered the stillness. I never took you for someone who found solace in the wild. I am not. Yet I hold the conviction that serene and visually pleasing things deserve to be truly valued. I spoke with a casual air before finally directing my gaze toward her since I had come. You mentioned you wanted to have a conversation. At that moment, I wore my previous disguise before he died, careful to avoid the situation where I might be recognized in public. I attribute my indifference toward a superhero's secret identity to the Avengers, for they showed little regard for it themselves. They were all figures of public acclaim, celebrated like heroes in the eyes of many. It's about your proposal. I want to know your intentions and what you stand to gain from this so that I know exactly what I'm getting myself into, she said as she watched newsreels and read blog postings on her phone. I replied to her query with a simple sentence. The complete upheaval of the Hellfire Club. Despite having already resolved to leave a mark in the history of this universe that will be known for generations to come, and despite sympathizing with the unjustified hatred and persecution that the mutants faced in their early days, I will not put myself in a position to appear as a savior to them. Who said they required a rescuer or a messiah? While I am far from being the brightest or most experienced person alive, the fact that my data logs date back to the dawn of the internet has to count for something. Eric and Charles, in my opinion, failed in one way. They both positioned themselves as the mutant kind's redeeming grace. Charles feels that his acts will be a watershed moment for the mutants, but Eric has put himself in the position of being adored as a king and believes that he is necessary for the mutants' future. This was why the mutants were almost always divided between Charles and Eric's factions. Mystique gave me a sideways glance and asked again, seeing that I meant precisely what I said. And you intend to do that by having me infiltrate the inner circle? There must have been a criteria that I passed for you to seek me out. What is it? I can tell she has already consented to my proposal, and this back and forth was only a technique for her to form a mental image of me. I don't care. In fact, it's better for her to form her own ideas about me via conversations like the one we're having right now. Criteria? Well, I won't lie and say that I didn't consider a few factors when deciding who I wanted to work on this with, I told her, rubbing my two hands together and blowing into them. First thing I considered when deciding on it was perseverance. I offered her the first reason while gazing directly at her, as if I could read her innermost thoughts and heart wishes. You stuck with Eric for more than 4 decades despite his numerous shortcomings. That requires an inhuman level of perseverance and focus, and I'll very much like that when working with someone. She appeared surprised, more in shock and astonishment with a hint of caution, but I didn't let her derail my momentum and kept talking stuff out of my ass mixed with what I knew about her. I believe Eric would not have gotten to where he is without you. Not to be presumptuous, but I believe he considers you an irreplaceable asset in his organization, that is if he hasn't gotten senile. I couldn't stop my lips from twitching as I remembered the astonishing number of betrayals and times she switched sides or played 2 groups altogether. Oh, she was no saint, no doubt about it. While you bring your own fair share of trouble, I could care less about them because you are pretty capable and haven't lost your head after more than a century. It turned out that this version of Mystique was the one over a century old because I found a picture of her in 1968 in her adult polymorph form. So in essence, what I'm basically trying to say is that you've been around for far much longer than either Charles or Eric, and you've been by their side long enough to remember all their behavioral tics and subconscious tells, and yet you are the one who has faded away. We were both peering into one another's eyes, trying to detect any hint of deception. I've previously said that this was not a proposition for equal cooperation, as that would imply that we are working towards a common objective. We are not. On my side, I had no incentive to lie to her because there was nothing to gain from it, and I didn't require anything from her. Her presence here with me was a decision I made after determining who I was dealing with. So, while there's an 80% chance she'll betray me later on, it won't affect me in any way. In fact, if that happens, nothing will stop me from assaulting her. I giggled a little because I could sense her astonishment and amazement transform to interest, which increased her wariness towards me. With nothing left to say to her, I completed my monologue with this conclusion. You are not a good person, Mystique, nor are you someone the fates played a hard hand against. You are evil. I don't care, though I think it's impossible, if you want redemption, repentance, or try to make amends. The only thing I want from you is being someone capable. We lapsed into another period of quiet as I finished what I wanted to say to her. I leaned my back on the seat and savored the smooth, tranquil caress of the breeze before returning to my daily routine. I sensed Mystique moving and recomposing herself, putting an end to any distracting ideas that were racing through her mind. How long did it take you to come up with something like that? She questioned, a smirk forming on the corners of her lips. No time at all. I came up with it on the fly. She sighed, and I could feel her relax as the stress she had brought with her faded away. You're right about a lot of things about me, but I hope you don't think you have me figured out with just that. I wouldn't dream of it. Good. I hope this alliance of ours becomes fruitful. She remarked, standing up from the seat and changing into another shape, this time a young guy. I'll be in touch, Naruto. And she walked away with that. Oh, and there is one more thing you got wrong about me. I do care. I am quite impressed, even if it isn't clearly stated. Not only her, but also myself. It's such a healthy moment when I realize how much I've changed from who I was a few months ago. I stood up from the bench, feeling a little lighter on the inside, and made my way out. You're not the only one who cares. At a secret place. Eric Lenscher, known as Magneto across the globe, sat alone in an empty chamber whose cool metallic silver surface reflected light. He was dressed in a dark crimson suit and a purple cloak that flowed back from his shoulders. At his side was his treasured helmet, which had accompanied him for more than half of his life. At this time, the metallic helmet was more than simply a useful instrument for blocking out telepaths. It had become something of a symbol of his personality. A knock echoed around the room, prompting the seated, eyes closed, cross-legged guy to speak without interrupting his concentration. Report. Sir. Everything has been carried out as you ordered. And Charles? There has been no intentional movement into or out of the mansion except for the children going to school, the men on the opposite side of the door attentively reported. And Mystique? No movements from her side either. Magneto requested nothing further and concentrated on his practice, while the guy on the other side of the door eagerly awaited any of his directions. Magneto opened his eyes and rose up from the cold steel floor where he had been seated after 5 minutes of speaking and doing nothing but taking measured breaths. Tell them to get ready, we have work to do. He murmured, taking his helmet and gently placed it on his head. And tell them to prepare a fitting gift for our human friends. Naruto's point of view. As predicted, the days after the accident were chaotic for everyone else, with hundreds of calls from the White House, Congress, and the Senate arriving every minute of the day. It became unpleasant to the point that Steve had to ask me to redirect the system's network to divert calls from certain IP addresses before we were able to obtain enough breathing room. On my end, I wasn't concerned about Raven failing because I knew she'd be working hard and had Emma's support. All she needed to do was give me an opportunity, a single cause, to crash and burn anyone she chose as her first victim. Some members of the inner circle would be difficult to seize their thrones if she attempted to do so, with the two kings and queens being notable examples. She was more than intelligent enough to avoid Celine's route, leaving just 3 huge cakes: Shaw, Frost, and Buckman. Trying to take down Shaw as the first target without lessening his influence would destroy the club, therefore he was immediately removed from the target list, leaving just Emma and Buckman. Buckman was the only person who met her primary target criterion because she had dealt with the White Queen. Raven pursued one of the key powers, which was expected given her personality. Aside from that, it appears that the recent mutant terrorist assault has prompted the emergence of various small-time heroes and vigilantes from around the state. Daredevil and Luke Cage appear to be out and about, according to rumors and blog articles picked up by the algorithm I had put up. Hopefully, this is all for the better. Since it was clear that we couldn't ignore the incessant calls from government offices indefinitely, Tony, Sam, and Steve were out conducting damage control and briefing the press on the attack. Sarah had summoned us to the lab, and I was now there with them. I got your call. Something up? She enthusiastically encouraged us to join her to a location where several culture tubes were stored. So, what exactly are we looking at? This. She shoved a petri dish into our hands and beckoned for us to examine it. I looked at Banner, but he only shrugged, demonstrating his ignorance on the subject. He grabbed the petri dish, placed it under the microscope, and zoomed in to examine it before turning to look at Sarah, puzzled, as she handed him a human DNA sample to examine. I could see what he saw, and I couldn't comprehend what she was trying to tell us, but as we both turned to her for an explanation, she grew clearly delighted. We waited a few seconds to allow her get off whatever high she was on before asking her what she was trying to tell us. First of all, that's not a human's DNA. At least not specifically. She went on. What do you mean, not specifically? Banner inquired. Because that's not pure human DNA, but a mutant's. She eventually confessed, and while Banner was stunned, I took the dish and placed it under the microscope in case my interface made a mistake. And yes, I get how silly that sounds. I carefully examined the cell structure, noting every contour and location, before recognizing it. Humans have 46 chromosomes, 23 of which are paired, and while mutants have the same 23 chromosomes, it is the last pair that distinguishes them. Humans have 22 autosomes and one pair of sexual XY or XX chromosomes. Mutants contain 21 autosomes, a pair of sexual chromosomes XX or XY, and a pair of undetermined X genes. However, what I was witnessing now was different. The purported X gene began to resemble neutral autosomes. How? Was the first thing that came out of my lips when I glanced at Sarah, as if she had grown another head. She then continued to discuss and show us her study, as well as the results of several trials and errors. Not only was I amazed with her intelligence, but so did Banner. I knew she was clever, but not like this. Why is this such a bizarre thing? I'm not sure, maybe it's because she recently solved one of the scientific puzzles surrounding the mutant race. The only thing that calmed my non-existent heart in its frantic pace was the fact that it was not permanent. For some reason she couldn't figure out, she couldn't completely suppress the last pair of chromosomes since they gradually reverted back to the X gene over time. You really outdid yourself this time, Sarah. You could even win a Nobel Prize if you make your achievements known and publish it as a thesis. I replied after trying several times and eventually getting over the idea that my employee had invented a mutant cure, albeit a temporary one. Well, as much as that is the dream of any science major, I'm afraid I can't push this out to the public, especially now that everything is tense. She remarked with a displeased face before scowling in my way. What? You really don't think I was actually thinking of putting this out there and letting the government have unbridled access to it, right? Well, that wasn't such an absurd thing to assume. If news spreads, the situation with mutations will worsen dramatically overnight. I don't even want to think about the ridiculous and dumb arguments they'll use to force the administration of this serum to every mutant who made the mistake of signing the registration. So, what are you going to do with the research? I asked her. Well, it's all saved up in my head, but we should upload one in yours as a safe backup. We can delete the original data and it'll just continue from where I stopped and try to unravel the mysteries of the X gene. I couldn't help but admire Sarah and her choice to shelve something so big. She was wasting something that countries would go to war for, and that is not an exaggeration. Banner gazed at her in awe, unable to believe she would toss away such a groundbreaking discovery, since he knew without even looking deep down that if he were in her situation, he would not have given up his study for anything. After all, it was his persistence that shaped him into the monster he is now. I understand what the both of you are thinking of, but I assure you I don't need to think much about it before making my decision. She grinned briefly while staring down at me. My daughter is still a little girl and a mutant at that. I'll be damned if I contribute to destroying her childhood with this. With that reasoning, I don't think I have anything else to say, I responded with a wry smile, gaining a better understanding of why she made such an easy decision. Well, if that's all, then I'll be taking my leave. See you guys later. After leaving Sarah's lab, I received a text that made my day even better. Raven, I've got something you should check into. Information was successfully downloaded. Proceed with assimilation. Yes. With a mental command, a block of foreign material was added to my ever-growing collection of information. So Shaw and Buckman have lately begun working together on a secret project, right? What are the odds? Now, what should I do? There are other things that demand my attention, but I believe I can have some fun at Buckman's expense. Generate a list of all known firms with Edward Buckman's ownership, sponsorship, and shares. Even though I know I won't be able to collect them all, the ones I do have should be enough to drive him insane with sorrow and disbelief. The first thing I did after receiving my list of Buckman's lifeblood was to determine which one had the most promise and was likely a long-term investment. I don't want to drown him all at once and scare him to death. What I wanted was for him to despair as he slowly drowned, little by bit, until he realized he was on the verge of death after battling for his life, and only then would his eyes open to understand that he had already lost everything while fighting for his life. It's not personal. It's just excellent business. As I proceeded down the corridor, I considered what strategy one should use while dealing with Buckman. Start small, aim big. Maybe go hard or go home. Given what I intended to achieve, there wasn't much to consider, so perhaps modus operandi isn't necessary. Haphazard mayhem for the victory. Since some of the others are out dealing with the bothersome issues that keep creeping up at every second, I don't imagine anybody will need my help for the time being. What's the first item we can hit? Give me anything little. Looking at the first choice, I smirked and dashed towards Edward Buckman's privately owned pier. I had suspected that this dock was a cover for drug or weapon trafficking, but it appears that I am underestimating Buckman. Some of the crates had additional layers, which Buckman exploited to trade organs. Mutant organs, to be exact. Well, I'm not one to spit in the face of evidence, therefore his awful deeds will serve a larger cause. The port's position made it clear that it was one of Buckman's valued assets, allowing him to ship nearly anything without restriction. Because of the dock's location facing the sea and the fact that he had sea guards and sailors in his pockets, he could virtually ship anything he wanted from any continent. Despite his own involvement in organ trafficking, he permitted other business colleagues to use his docks for continental commerce in exchange for royalties. So, how can I remove a port while simultaneously utilizing it for PR? Aha! I slammed my palms together as I devised the ideal solution for this situation. 30 minutes later. Buckman's port was besieged from all sides by police cars and helicopters during a city pursuit to apprehend some rival gang members who had no alternative but to flee to any available path in terror. It took some mental manipulation on my part to start a sudden battle between two well-known crime syndicates while simultaneously tipping off the police so that they could respond quickly. With a few suggestions here and a little manipulation there, I had half of the NYPD pursuing 4 heavily armed SUVs used by the criminals to flee into the harbor for reasons unbeknownst to anybody but me. Since what was supposed to be a closed-end gang fight turned into a citywide pursuit, the cops were forced to put on their mean pants and demonstrate their power to the public because the entire city was watching them and they desperately needed good PR after the public's dwindling faith in them following the recent mutant debacle. The port was forced to close indefinitely, and because it was a crime scene and the site of an intense shootout, the police immediately began an investigation, with Captain George Stacy ordering his men to case the entire dock with extreme precision in order to determine why the criminals escaped here. Who would have predicted it? A small mental shove from me was all he needed to disregard all the phone calls he was receiving from privately held law firms and even the chief of police requesting that his men leave the private property they were illegally examining. It just took minutes for them to uncover the concealed cargo of gun shipments, narcotics, and the icing on top. Hell, I even offered the public front row seats, and I also tipped off most of the TV channels, which were presently circling the dock in helicopters and broadcasting live to New Yorkers. This is just the start. I went through all of that difficulty merely to make it appear like an unfortunate but normal example of a police pursuit gone wrong, so Edward Buckman wouldn't realize someone was after him right away. I took care to ensure that one of the groups involved in this elaborate scheme also utilized this specific dock for the weapons shipment. If one might be called a coincidence, then what of 5? Edward Buckman's perspective. Edward Buckman, consumed by rage, hurled his glass of wine at the massive screen in his office. He was among the few who had a front row seat to the unfolding live event at one of his privately owned docks. Damn it! He swore under his breath as the situation grew more tangled, those insufferable vultures daring to display his image on their screen after they had marked him as the owner of this dock. Everything unfolded in a blur, leaving him with no time to respond before it all collapsed into disorder. At this moment, the last thing required was to find oneself in an unfavorable light. He let the phone buzz with its persistent messages, choosing instead to reach for another device to make a few calls. He understood the police were on their way, armed with more than enough evidence and a warrant to take him into custody. Regrettably for him, this was not the sole concern he had to keep an eye on. From the perspective of Naruto, I chuckled quietly at the veil I had spun, and to deepen its shadows, I picked up the phone. You may begin to disclose the evidence related to his publicly owned assets and enterprises. I find myself drawn to the mystery of your swift accomplishments, yet I suspect you'll keep your secrets close. In any case, I will fulfill my end of the bargain. I kept my silence, allowing her to pursue her own path while I concentrated on my own endeavors. It is a pity for Buckman, caught in a struggle, his mind set on escaping the snare that binds him. Meanwhile, I will ensure that he becomes further ensnared as the inquiry unfolds. He will exhaust himself, pondering an escape, only to discover he is utterly ensnared in a labyrinth of his own making. In the coming days, Buckman will face a relentless tide of misfortune. A number of companies and businesses he is tied to will cast him aside, voting him out as the weight of numerous charges looms. Soon, Raven will begin to unveil the lists of his transgressions that I have unearthed. I refuse to sit idly by and let fate decide. It's time to take action and steer things toward my own desires. Raven Darkholm's perspective. Buckman found himself not alone in his surprise at the recent turn of events. Raven and her companion, Emma Frost, shared in the unexpectedness of it all. You mentioned he possessed knowledge about certain members of the Hellfire Club, perhaps even all of them, correct? Emma inquired, her attention lost in the flickering images of urgent news flashing across the screens. Yes. That was Raven's answer, plain and unadorned. The weight of what this meant sent a chill down Emma's spine, and though she fought to conceal it, Raven noticed the tremor in her resolve. As the leader of the Hellfire Club, a woman of considerable ambition and skill, she was no paragon of virtue, and her hands bore the marks of her ruthless dealings. What troubled her was the notion of what might have transpired had Naruto chosen her first instead of permitting Raven to make the selection. In just 45 minutes, Buckman, despite his wealth and the layers of protection surrounding him, found himself in the cold grip of police custody, entangled in a case that was undeniably damning and that was far from the conclusion. It hardly qualified as a beginning, not after she learned of the things Buckman had been involved in, things she had been blissfully ignorant of until this moment. Is he aware that we are collaborating? Emma inquired, pausing to weigh the thought for a moment. Raven stopped her work and contemplated it. Is he aware of my bond with Emma? Most likely, yes. That is the premise I am operating under. She confessed. Confronted by that straightforward response, Emma began to devise her own strategies. In the end, she refused to be taken by surprise like Buckman had been. I notice you've had your hands full. Naruto glanced at Wanda, who stood casually against the doorframe of his room. It was inevitable, really. Wanda listened to his reply, her gaze drawn to the mind stone embedded in his forehead, a clear sign that he was engaged in some purpose with it. What comes after this? She questioned herself. Watching Edward Buckman on the news, his unease was clear. In that moment, she understood who was pulling the strings, and now she was eager to uncover his next move. What certain individuals fail to grasp, particularly those who see themselves as heroes, is that true valor emerges in the midst of turmoil, and we find ourselves in the most tumultuous of times. Since she couldn't grasp his words, he had to simplify things for her. Though the present seems dark, it is a time ripe for heroes and those who stand with them to rise. Now is the moment to act, to shift the tide of public sentiment, for their efforts will resonate more deeply than on any ordinary day. Wanda grasped the essence of his words, yet the connection to his present actions eluded her grasp. What I mean is that the best course of action for the public now is to divert their focus from the impending doom of mutants and direct it towards something more constructive. A victim of circumstance. I see you're making good progress. He spoke, a sense of admiration in his voice. And Buckman is merely the first of many to step into that role. With a sense of clarity about what Naruto might do next, Wanda inquired. What comes next for you? Simple. He spoke with a lightness in his voice. The fire has been lit, and now we must bide our time, letting the smoke do its work to flush out the vermin we seek. Wanda's face twisted in a strange way upon hearing Naruto's words, while he merely raised an eyebrow, questioning the moment. What you just said lacks the weight of a true hero's words. As he listened to her thoughts, Naruto chuckled, not in derision or amusement, but in recognition of the bitter irony woven through it all. He moved past Wanda, signaling her to come along, and began to speak while she matched his stride beside him. The terms hero and villain are steeped in subjectivity, shaped by personal views, rendering the very idea itself flawed and intricately biased. He took a moment, observing her keen interest rather than a challenge, and then he elaborated further. Yet, in contrast to the two ideas discussed before, the notions that remain untainted or unfairly judged are good and bad. Heroes earn their title by doing what is right for the people, so instead of seeking heroism, I choose to simply be good. It offers clarity and establishes a steady moral compass. Wanda observed that Naruto had a knack for clarity and precision in his speech. His words often carried the weight of advice, occasionally bordering on a lecture, rather than flowing freely in casual conversation. She figured it wasn't something he meant to do, so she let it go, chalking it up to yet another quirk of his artificial nature. Maybe it has to do with the way Jarvis structured the code. He bears some resemblance to Ultron, though he lacks the sharp, biting remarks. That's a solid story, but you haven't yet revealed what your next move will be. Ah, it appears I lost my way. Have you ever come across the saying strike while the iron is hot? Sebastian Shaw perused the recent reports from his associates about Edward Buckman's case, which had unexpectedly escalated into a national lawsuit, with several states now pursuing action against Buckman. His expression was unyielding as he perused the exhaustive and intricate report that laid bare the challenges Buckman would encounter at the very least. Even if he attempted to slip away from this, the marks would remain with him forever. "I suppose this is where your journey concludes, my friend." He spoke with a faint smile before reaching for the intercom on his desk. "Deliver a word to the rest. We must talk about Buckman's case and consider if the club ought to intervene." He spoke those words, yet he understood the intentions of the vultures, the choices they would make regarding Buckman, and he felt a grim satisfaction at the thought of it all unfolding. It was all to his advantage, for he understood Buckman's shady dealings better than anyone. This knowledge ensured that the biggest share would land in his grasp, while the others would be left to fight over the scraps he chose to discard. One must always tend to the hungry beasts lurking just out of sight. Not so much that it will have the strength to strike at you, and not so little that it will wither and become wild against you. The Hellfire Club, with its wealth and influence, valued discretion above all. Buckman's little misstep threatened to unravel that carefully woven facade. Elite businessmen, after all, loathed nothing more than the burden of another's folly weighing upon them. He made another call, issuing his commands the moment the line connected. "Get in touch with Buckman's attorneys. Inform them that I have a proposal regarding business matters for their consideration. One they would prefer not to overlook." And in that moment, all things align. Wanda Maximoff's perspective. Though I initially questioned his words, that woman named Mystique truly is remarkable. She has woven herself into Buckman's life with such finesse that the poor man could hardly discern her from his wife. Truly. It seems that the ability to change form and possess exceptional skills in the art of deception can prove invaluable when the moment calls for it. At that moment, I found myself alone, infiltrating a hidden storage site where Edward Buckman stashed away his possessions. There were many of these, and he didn't take the time to clarify what was stored where. That meant we had to take it upon ourselves to cover the bases, just in case any of them proved to hold real significance. I trust this will enhance the value of the trip. Additionally, there are necessary security personnel and the presence of that malfunctioning Ultron replica. Wealthy individuals often allocate their resources towards a variety of unexpected items. Who else would invest millions to secure an underground storage facility located in a remote area? While navigating beyond the perimeters was straightforward, it became apparent that this was where the process concluded. It appears I inadvertently activated a sensor that my skills did not detect. The Ultron lookalike turned towards me and began articulating some robotic dialogue that I could not afford to focus on, as I was preoccupied with mentally tallying the individuals currently approaching my position. My apologies, everyone. This is my first time undertaking a significant responsibility independently, and I cannot afford to make any mistakes. The Ultron imitation was approaching swiftly, but I adeptly captured it in a telekinetic grip and redirected it aside to focus on the numerous armed mercenaries and mutants. Additionally, I caused the ground surrounding them to begin sinking, which triggered yet another round of the typical warnings of "Careful, she's a mutant," as if it hadn't been evident from the outset. In an effort to establish some personal space, my eyes emitted a red glow, and those who encountered my gaze found themselves swiftly under my influence. Unfortunately, I do not possess the advanced telepathy and mind control abilities akin to Naruto. The commands I can issue using these methods are limited to basic instructions, which proved to be ideal for this particular situation. Eliminate one another. A straightforward command was all that was required to prompt those captivated by my presence to begin turning against their own, exacerbating the existing disorder in the environment. 2 projectiles struck the barrier I had constructed around me, resulting in a significant explosion. The source of this explosion was the robot, which now appeared to have designated me as its top priority target. I launched 2 hex blasts at the target, the first causing a brief stumble in its flight path, while the second was absorbed with a more controlled response. It appears to be quite durable. Before the robot approached within a few meters of me, a red chain extended from my palms and encircled its neck, which I utilized to pull it closer to myself. The entity attempted to respond to the abrupt tug and reached out towards me when I was within range, but my form dissipated into a red mist as the illusion vanished. Subsequently, the robot was drawn directly into the ground as if it were a viscous substance. That should suffice for the time being until I complete my work with the others. I stated before, directing my attention to the chaos of the battlefield surrounding me. It has come to my attention that several days have passed since our last night patrol. I will inform him that we should schedule a time to meet after this. Consider evaluating and streamlining certain operations. Perspective of Naruto. Given Buckman's inability to address the numerous allegations against him, it was an opportune moment for Raven to advance and assume her position within the inner circle. I was somewhat taken aback by her decision to impersonate Buckman's wife, but I refrained from expressing any judgment regarding her approach. The woman in question was not without her flaws. Given that a seat may be passed down to a family member, there would likely be little objection to Buckman's wife assuming his position. Some individuals might even speculate that Buckman was merely utilizing her as a figurehead to maintain the influence associated with the title of White King. The most advantageous aspect of being a polymorph is the ability to replicate the complete characteristics of any living entity. Consequently, elements such as Buckman's fingerprint, signatures, and even eye scans were readily available to Raven. Regarding his concealed caches and safe houses, it had not yet been disclosed that Buckman was placing his wife in his position. Consequently, the other stakeholders at the table were prepared to take any necessary actions to secure as much as possible once they received the official confirmation of Buckman's sentence. I anticipated that situation and have already secured Wanda and Pietro upon determining their location. The twins were the most suitable option to efficiently complete the task with minimal complications, effectively addressed by Pietro's speed and Wanda's versatile magic. I believed it would be prudent to investigate what he concealed in those storage areas. As I reviewed the files that Raven and Emma obtained from Buckman, I found myself rubbing my temple, pondering the recurring theme of cloning and genetic mutation among Marvel's antagonists. The initial focus was clearly the Project Armageddon, into which Buckman was investing a significant portion of his wealth. This project, Armageddon, not only concentrated on genetic mutation but also laid the foundational framework for what would eventually become the Sentinels. I am now contemplating whether I may have been too lenient with Buckman. This individual exhibited signs of obsession and an intense fixation on the concept, demonstrating unwavering support. However, upon discovering the influence behind his eventual downfall, I find it difficult to express surprise. Exceptional. I believe we should consider this matter seriously. Additionally, this individual abruptly vanished following Buckman's incident, which means my virus containment plan will need to be postponed for the time being. However, prior to proceeding with those matters, there is an important task I must attend to. I was preparing to proceed, but I considered this an opportune moment to assess Steve's mental resilience and his probable thought patterns, so I decided to invite him along for my sightseeing excursion. My esteemed captain and I required a candid discussion. Individual to individual. I proceeded towards the main coast, where the island containing the research and experimental facility for Project Armageddon is located. Steve maintained silence as I subjected him to an electromagnetic field to mitigate the risk of whiplash while I consistently exceeded Mach speeds, thereby reducing the time required to reach our destination. We are present now, so could you please provide me with the details regarding the purpose of my visit? Steve inquired as we hovered above the island. I shook my head at him and gestured towards the longest building on the island. You will discover the details shortly. Let us proceed. With his shield secured to his arms, we descended onto a tall building, phased through the roof, and landed on one of the upper floors, which was fortunately unoccupied upon our arrival. Our destination is relatively close to this location. Please hold for a moment. I approached the door and interacted with the keypad, which granted me access to the digital network coverage encompassing the entire island. I approached Steve and placed my hand on his shoulders. Let's expedite this process. Before he could articulate any further thoughts, the environment shifted dramatically, and we found ourselves in an expansive warehouse-like setting. Individuals moved about, yet none acknowledged our presence, as we remained cloaked in invisibility. Given your expression, it seems you are already aware of the situation or perhaps have some familiarity with it, correct? Biologically engineered soldiers. His unremarkable voice inquired. Biologically engineered enhanced soldiers. I have made the necessary corrections. Congratulations, Captain. The super soldier serum is no longer regarded as a highly sought-after scientific breakthrough. Ultimately, why opt for a capable soldier when you can have an even more formidable superpowered super soldier? He assessed the room and the individuals moving about, both scientists and soldiers, before finally directing his attention towards me. What was the purpose of bringing me here, Naruto? Could you please clarify your objectives in presenting this to me? It is straightforward, Steve. This situation cannot continue indefinitely. Nor can those individuals who would undertake this. He expressed discontent at my words and inquired. Are you suggesting eliminating all of them? A subdued, melancholic laugh escaped me, yet my gaze remained fixed on Steve without interruption. I ensure that I address only those directly involved with cases of this nature, as well as the armed personnel. However, I am not referring to the act of killing. He conveyed his confusion directly, and my response was a point I have been attempting to clarify for him from the very beginning. It is no longer focused on incarceration. Eliminating targets is a necessary aspect of our profession, with the crucial condition being that we are aware of the appropriate individuals to engage. We will begin to reveal all pertinent information for public scrutiny, and even if individuals attempt to evade accountability through financial means or connections, we will ensure they are held responsible, irrespective of external opinions. We have moved beyond concern for their rhetoric. As long as these actions persist, we will take all necessary measures to address the situation. Public opinion is irrelevant. We refrain from labeling ourselves as heroes. Rather, we act based on our understanding of what is right and essential for fostering the change we aspire to achieve. We maintained our gaze, neither of us moving a muscle under the intensity of the other's stare. Who will ensure accountability in the unlikely event that one of us acts outside established protocols? He inquired, maintaining the intensity of his gaze, to which I responded with a smirk. You have my support, correct? I am confident in my abilities to surpass any of my competitors. We exchanged glances before sharing a brief moment of laughter. His posture appeared significantly more relaxed, and the oppressive atmosphere surrounding him seemed to have diminished considerably. It is clear that he had also been considering a perspective similar to what I just articulated. That is a significant assertion, and I will ensure accountability. He turned around and observed the view unfolding before us with a pained expression. It is essential for the others to align their decisions with ours in order for this initiative to succeed. Certainly, and with that, the case is hereby temporarily adjourned. We do not have an operation to dismantle after all. This served merely as the introduction before the situation escalated dramatically. The unexpected arrival of two individuals in the most secure area of the island startled everyone, as none were aware of how they managed to get there. Care to do the honors, Captain? Sure. He took a few steps forward and cleared his throat before making his announcement. Everyone please, for your own good and for my peace of mind, surrender. His remarks were met by bullets pelting his entire body, yet none of them did any significant harm because the empty shells all fell to the ground. Well, at least no one can say I didn't try. I believe Steve became a mobile tank as a result of the outfit I designed for him, as he plunged right into the fray and began pummeling his way through without regard for how much he harmed people. And why should he? He was righteously outraged, and if anyone who knew him saw him now, they would feel the same way. If it's about making a statement, then I guess we really need to make it memorable. Unlike Steve, who was going crazy, I was strolling slowly to the opposite side of his massive floor. I discovered something quite fascinating and wanted to see it for myself. I didn't bother with the ones who were attempting to assault me since they were rapidly cut through by the lightning that was dancing about my body and was as thick as a fist. When I arrived, I smiled slightly and brushed the pale girl's raven black hair as she slept on a medical bed with many pipes placed into her body. It was amusing to see Domino sleeping soundly despite the fact that everything was occurring on the same floor. It made me question whether her powers had anything to do with it, but that wasn't a major issue at the time. Apart from Domino, there were 4 additional test participants, which helped me comprehend how difficult it was to conduct an effective experiment in fresh research. The place alone had consumed almost $5 billion in the last year, and they had nothing to show for it but the equipment. Well, up you go. Based on the timing, it appears that she was only a few minutes away from undertaking the identical operations that she and the other 4 perform practically every day. Ignoring the grunts and continual thunderous booms, I proceeded to where the others were being held, and sure enough, they were all restless and expectant after hearing the sounds of gunfire and battle. They all recoiled when they saw me carrying Domino, yet their concern was clear to me. Is there another timeline inconsistency? It's not like it really matters in the first place. The doors of their cages opened, but dread kept them anchored to the group, terrified to take even the first step toward the freedom they longed for. Are you guys going to move your legs or spend the whole day moping around? They flinched, and we all just stood there staring at one another until one of them summoned the confidence to exit the cage, and like a magnet in a bucket of pins, the others virtually flew towards him and stood there, waiting for me to lead the way. It was a simple gesture, but watching how I stayed patient with them until they conquered their concerns freed the shaking and dread that had been draped over them like a costly Italian silk. Let's not delay any longer and depart. You guys okay with that plan? They all nodded timidly, and two of them yelped as they heard something explode. With a snap of my finger, a transparent barrier encompassed all of us, and it quickly shifted, or rather decreased it to a greater extent, as they now gazed in wonder as Captain America ate his way through the whole base as if he had a bone to pick with everyone. I believe these kids discovered their idol because they were all fixated on the devastation he was wreaking without caring who was on the receiving end of it. Captain America, I heard one of the kids grumble under his breath, but I said nothing and simply moved them to a safe place as we watched Steve finish his battle with half of the floor shattered, which made little sense given that the guy had no particular skill. He was astonished to see the youngsters around me and felt uneasy when he realized they were most likely watching his race against the clock, driving him to sneer at me. What shall I say? Even if those fists were rated 18 on a normal day, they were nonetheless entertaining to see. Are they? Yeah. I see. He replied with an understanding expression as he hung his shield on his back. Well, let's get out of here. I was about to nod and build a plane merely to relieve their mental pressure when my senses picked up on the camouflaged aircraft that had just landed on the island, accompanied by a group of strangely clothed individuals making their way over quickly. We got incoming. I remarked and continued as I saw Steve prepare to draw out his shield for round 2. They are not hostile. Only then did he relax slightly. Seriously, this dude needs to relax. I looked at Steve, silently asking if we should greet the new arrival, after linking one of the island cams to the HUD in his suit, allowing him to identify them using my database. It wouldn't hurt, right? I simply shrugged, and we began making our way down to the foundation floor of the pretty enormous skyscraper. On our way down, I saw how the 5 kids with us, including the one pretending to be sleeping in my arms, appeared to be taking the death they'd witnessed in stride. Sure, the blood and gore upset them, and some even felt their skin crawl when they saw broken bones and spilt guts, but they handled it well and tried not to think about it too much. As for the impending X-Men, while I might have looked forward to it a while ago after spending several months in this universe and also as Vision, let's just say I'm feeling very passive. Talking about perspective, let's take a broader approach. 376 mind partitions were generated. So there are still 376 people living on this island. Perform a mental sweep and emphasize individuals who are classified as irredeemable. I sensed a few thoughts putting up a mental barrier, but for once, I ignored the constraints I'd been placing on the Mind Stone and effortlessly smashed through them, allowing the partitions to skin the brains of everyone there. I am well aware that I cannot incite a carnage here, but that does not mean I should constantly limit myself because of it. 202 persons are marked as must kill, irredeemable. Well, most are hired weapons and a few deranged scientists, but the numbers are honestly not what I was expecting. I groaned and went to Steve, offering him a basic number. 202, he appeared hesitant for a time, but eventually, like me, groaned and went to work. Had already gotten the information and location markers he needed from me, and the X-Men downstairs were doing a good job of taking care of some of them, so all he had to do was start thinning the herd from our side as we went lower, which was also why I didn't just carry everyone out of there. Why am I leaving Steve to do the tough lifting? Aside from his feeling of duty and readiness to accept a burden, having me keep an eye on the youngsters ensures their entire safety. We arrived at our goal without any time lag thanks to Steve's leadership and my support, and every hostile we encountered was dealt with quickly. The moment we appeared on the floor where the X-Men were currently fighting, the room fell silent as the remaining handful of armed men found themselves in the middle of 2 very small, yet absurdly powerful groups of superpowered individuals, and made the wise decision to lay down their weapons without my even making the mental suggestion. I could sense their relief as they assessed the safety of the children behind me before turning their focus to me and Steve with their introductory cue. Hello, my name is Storm and these are my colleagues Beast, Wolverine, Colossus, and Cyclops. She remarked, gesturing to the rest of the squad, as she introduced them. Steve Rogers. Naruto. Ours was a touch restrained, but that was all we had to offer in terms of an introduction. Most people, if not everyone, knew Captain America's real name, and mine was exactly that. Maybe I should try to acquire a civilian ID. This may be handy. Do you mind if we take some of your time? It's about the children, she said while casting a glance at the youngsters, prompting them to tremble slightly. I knew where this was headed, so I simply glanced at Steve and nodded. We followed the X-Men as we left the building, eventually arriving at the location where they landed their plane, which caused the fairly dismal youngsters to seem surprised as they saw the X-Men's specialized aircraft. Are these them? Steve murmured as we followed the group, coming to a halt when they approached their identified ship, Blackbird. The Avengers weren't wholly unaware of some facts, one of which being the existence of the mutants in front of us. Yeah, probably here to take the children. That was their style, and to be honest, I'm delighted they did it. The compound had not yet been designated to care for children, so there was no way we could effectively care for them. Not to mention that the only person in the compound near to their age group was Laura, and she wasn't the best talker around. At least with the X-Men, I can trust them to look after the children and provide them with a childhood experience rather than keeping them in a military setting like the compound. Hank was checking the youngsters on the side, with Scott assisting him, while Aurora and Logan approached us about custody of the children from the base. I appreciate your intentions, however, could you please clarify the direction you plan to take? Steve stated. We have limited options available to us. We are unable to offer the level of emotional and mental support that children like them require after experiencing significant challenges. However, this does not imply that we will simply hand them over to an unfamiliar group, particularly in the case of Steve and the others. Aurora hesitated before speaking, and from the telepathic wave I sensed coming from her, it appeared that Charles had just reached out to her. Following the unexpected call from Charles, Aurora's mental state shifted from a defensive posture to one of acceptance, indicating the conclusion they had reached. It is acceptable. The professor expressed his desire to meet with both of you, she remarked, casting a sidelong glance at me. I kindly ask for your understanding as I attend to other matters for the moment. She entered the ship, leaving us with Logan, who had remained silent throughout. He seemed to be deep in thought, but ultimately shook his head and set his thoughts aside. After parting ways with Steve and Logan, I proceeded to assess the situation with the children under Hank's care. Based on my assessment of the individuals, it was evident that each of them exhibited signs of PTSD, likely resulting from their experiences and the experiments conducted on them. Their calmness in response to Beast conducting a medical checkup can likely be attributed to the reassuring presence of Steve and myself, particularly Steve. The task was completed efficiently, and by that time, all necessary preparations at the base had been finalized. Consequently, they boarded their jet, which transported us to Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. The initial impression I formed of the estate resembled more of an 1800s castle than that of a school. Streamlined. Upon disembarking from the plane, we were greeted by a small group of 3 at the hangar, comprising the proprietor of the establishment, a young Jean Grey, and Lance Alvars. Professor. I acknowledged Xavier with a nod, which was subsequently accompanied by a handshake between Steve and me. As you may already be aware, my name is Charles Xavier, and I extend a warm welcome to my esteemed institution. He spoke fluently and then gestured for us to follow him. Kindly proceed this way. I am confident that we have a productive discussion ahead of us. We proceeded into the manor under Charles' guidance, as he directed us and exchanged brief remarks throughout the journey. We observed children concealing themselves behind doors, engaging in animated, hushed conversations at the sight of one of the nation's, and indeed the world's, most renowned heroes traversing their corridors. Do you observe that? Steve, you are a prominent figure. I smiled, my words eliciting a faint smile from him. He was not at ease with the prominence that his identity conferred upon him. It is fair to say that the actions of Steve Rogers are familiar to many of us from our formative years. Charles remarked as he entered the expansive office, which featured a blend of classic charm and understated modernity. It was a pleasant surprise to learn that he successfully navigated through the years. I was on the verge of speaking when I observed that Jean was displaying a confused expression, which I acknowledged but chose not to inquire about. It appeared that someone had a comment to share with me regarding the matter. Excuse me, Mr. It appears that I may need to devise a civilian name. Naruto, I responded to Charles. Mr. Naruto. Could you please lower your telepathic dome? It is causing considerable discomfort for my student. Charles provided clarification on the situation. I possessed a form of passive telepathy that was consistently active, enabling me to gauge the emotional states of those in my vicinity. I had never needed to concern myself with this matter, as none of my teammates possessed telepathic abilities. However, observing Jean in her current state and noting the instability of her telepathic signature has brought to my attention an aspect I had previously overlooked. It was, in fact, inhibiting her telepathic abilities. Unfortunately, she was unable to utilize her fundamental empathetic abilities. For a young telepath like her, it must feel as if her vision had suddenly become obscured. I remained silent and retracted my telepathic presence, allowing it to envelop my body before I turned to Jean with a somewhat apologetic expression. "Now that we have addressed that minor issue, what would you like to discuss with us?" I stated. To date, I have not encountered any information regarding the individual that would lead me to maintain a distance or form a negative assessment of him. Upon hearing my question, the individual in question offered a slight smile and began with a note of gratitude. "Thank you for your efforts in rescuing those children. It is regrettable that such circumstances are occurring, particularly affecting children. Drawbacks of human existence, I suppose. Regrettably, it appears," he stated with a hint of frailty. "However, I would like to understand the position that your organization holds regarding the current issue at hand. It has come to my attention that you declined to sign the registration. Could you please clarify the reason for this decision?" On this occasion, it was Steve who responded with a composed voice and steady tone. "It is designed primarily for their advantage, with minimal consideration for the individuals who are expected to enroll." "I understand." He subsequently directed his gaze towards me. "And you?" I am uncertain about his intentions or what he is attempting to investigate, but I appreciate his honesty in posing the question. It is evident that he is genuinely interested in our perspectives. However, while I can infer some of his intentions, I cannot ascertain his thoughts directly, as attempting to do so would be inappropriate. It is uncertain whether I could potentially incapacitate him. No significant matters. It appears to be an inadequate effort to conceal an unwise prank. I leaned back slightly in the chair and observed the individuals in the office. The unfortunate aspect of this situation is that the mutants lack a public platform. A type of advocate. That elicited wry smiles on their faces, as my statement was accurate. Indeed, there have been mutants who have made their presence known and sought to influence public opinion by asserting that mutants are still human. While this is a commendable effort, the challenge lies in the fact that their message does not resonate strongly enough with those who truly need to hear it. It presents quite a challenge, does it not? Charles spoke softly. It is evident that this issue is not particularly complex, as even individuals with a basic understanding of politics can readily identify this significant flaw. Regrettably for Charles and Eric, it was an attribute they did not possess. Despite Charles' vocal support for mutants and the numerous petitions he has submitted for their consideration, he still lacked the necessary influence to challenge the lawmakers effectively. Regarding Eric, regardless of the perspective taken, his actions leave much to be desired, as he prominently displayed the label of the world's most dangerous man, a highly debatable claim, and terrorist as if it were a crown. "Thank you for your time and for addressing my questions." He mentioned it, but both Steve and I dismissed it. "Having addressed that matter, I would like to provide reassurance and alleviate some of your concerns regarding the safety and well-being of the children. Feel free to visit occasionally and check in on them if you wish," he stated with a pleasant smile on his face. Steve, however, was not satisfied with that alone, and it was evident that, had it not been for our shortcomings, he would have taken the children with him. Fortunately for him, he did not support the concept of child soldiers. "Understood, I will inform you in advance if I decide to visit," he stated with utmost seriousness, which took Charles by surprise. However, the elderly man quickly regained his composure and responded with a straightforward, "Sure." The remainder of the discussion consisted largely of trivial matters until we took our leave, but not before encountering the children we had rescued. Jean discreetly observed us as she guided us to the medical lab, where Hank was conducting a thorough examination to determine if any effects had resulted from the experimental procedures they underwent. "You will be staying here for the time being, but there is no need for concern. They will provide you with excellent care." I placed a hand on Domino's shoulders while gently patting the head of the boy beside her. They were adolescents, intellectually astute yet emotionally unstable. I observed Domino with a sense of astonishment, recognizing the trust she placed in me and her genuine desire to accompany me. I found it quite surprising, considering it has only been a few hours since our initial meeting. There may be various reasons for this situation, however. It would be more beneficial for her to remain with them here and reacquaint herself with social interactions within society. I may visit in the future to see how you are doing. We are uncertain about the timing, so we remain hopeful. I expressed my thoughts, and she responded with a complete smile. Understood. Her trusting nature may stem from her abilities, the reasons for which are unclear to me, or perhaps this is simply her inherent disposition. It is uncertain. Wanda. Could you please provide an explanation of what I am currently observing? I inquired with slight movements as I observed the piece of metal she had just placed before me. Wanda, positioned next to me, displayed a brief moment of irritation as she observed it. An enhanced Ultron bot. It was quite frustrating to manage, as it persistently attempted to stand up. A Sentinel. An undeniably aged model, yet a Sentinel all the same. It is perplexing why every antagonist in this world does not take a moment to relax and adopt a more composed demeanor from time to time. Did you manage to locate any additional information? A collection of research materials and procured organs. It is astonishing how unacceptably low some individuals can descend. Your observation is certainly valid, my dear. However, the majority of these factors were beyond Buckman's influence. While he is not without fault, it is clear that there is an underlying influence driving his behavior. Thus far, the influence of Sinister and Sublime has been evident, and while both presented formidable challenges, Sublime stands out as the more significant adversary. What is the process for locating a bacterium? I paused briefly to review the message from Raven regarding her acquisition of the seat of the White King. I believe Shaw would have been quite displeased, but I will allow it to settle for the time being. The Sentinel demonstrates a commendable level of intelligence by operating on automated directives. If I had been the individual who engaged in the confrontation, I would have determined the destination of its backup logs. All components capable of transmitting data in this device have either melted or become inoperative. Could you please inform me of Pietro's whereabouts? I inquired because the speeding individual was not present in the vicinity of the compound. He expressed his intention to achieve 1 or 2 additional bases if he completes his tasks ahead of schedule. Wanda positioned herself by pulling out a chair and seated herself directly across from me, attentively observing my every action. Is there anything you require, Wanda? She merely responded with a leaving me uncertain of her meaning, while she continued to observe as I dismantled the robot before me, assessing whether its upgrades could offer any benefits to me. Will you be observing my work throughout the entire duration? I paused to give her a brief glance before redirecting my attention to what lay ahead. I currently have no other pressing commitments. I acknowledged her words with a smile, conveying the amusement I experienced. It appears that your intentions are quite apparent. I initially considered that she might retract her statement or clarify her intentions, but instead, she merely pressed her lips together in an endearing manner before shrugging her shoulders. A small amount is acceptable. That is a clear and straightforward statement. A sentiment that I greatly value. I refrained from making any further comments, and given her expressed enjoyment in observing my work, I allowed her to find her own amusement while I skillfully disassembled the Sentinel. As time progressed, my attention remained primarily on the Sentinel, yet I found myself unable to extract any valuable insights from it. Throughout this period, Wanda maintained her watchful gaze on me, even after Pietro made his brief appearance and subsequently departed. Is that a bust? I acknowledged her presence before consolidating everything into a compact form and disposing of it in the recycle bin. I then turned to the lady in red who had been patiently waiting for me. I am currently available until further notice. I stated as I transformed my attire into something more comfortable. Do you have any specific ideas in mind? Wanda and I dedicated the following hours to addressing the criminal elements of New York while simultaneously advancing the contemporary narrative of the Witch and the Men. At this juncture, we continued our actions not merely to release some tension but to share a few laughs at the expense of an unfortunate individual. It is, in fact, a scheduled appointment. It is evident to anyone, regardless of their level of understanding, that this was merely a date. Clear and straightforward. The primary distinction was that rather than enjoying leisure activities at a restaurant or attending a film, we derived our enjoyment from instilling fear in criminals, causing them to scream and faint. Her abilities were proving to be quite useful. It was transitioning beyond mere hex blasts and constructs to now influencing matters of various states. It has become increasingly challenging to articulate how she accomplishes many of her tasks, even when I draw from my extensive knowledge base. I should consider arranging a visit to the Masters. Given my confidence that Wanda will remain stable in the foreseeable future, I am eager to assist her with her magical abilities. What better approach than to have her learn from the Sanctum? She possesses the potential of the Sorcerer Supreme and beyond, so I am confident that the current leader of Sanctum will provide her with significant support. Having Thawne's avatar and prime successor as a supporter is a significant advantage, even when considering the broader Marvel multiverse. What is the current count? Wanda inquired as we entered a cash and drug house, a scenario to which we have become accustomed. 17, I remarked with a whistle as I calculated the total amount of liquid cash in this location to be slightly over 15 million. These crime lords possess substantial financial resources. What are your expectations? Wanda remarked casually, her hands and eyes enveloped in an unsettling red glow. Individuals invest significant amounts of money in items that provide them with enjoyment. The value of the porn industry is comparable to that of the global entertainment industry. I observed the disdain on her face as she remarked this, directing her gaze towards the group of women dancing on platforms, with money being tossed at them by individuals who were accompanied by multiple partners. I can appreciate that perspective when considering the context. I responded with a subdued chuckle, carefully steering clear of the piercing gaze that was about to be directed at me. What is your inquiry? Your decision. There is no justification for allowing them to remain alive, she stated. I arrived at the bar and took a seat before signaling to the bartender. Excuse me, sir, please prepare 2 servings of death in the afternoon. He acknowledged and proceeded to prepare the somewhat ironic beverage, considering the events that were about to unfold in the next few moments. I sensed several gazes directed towards me, as my unfamiliar presence was evident after I appeared unnoticed and proceeded to order a drink in a venue reserved for a specific group. Hello, my friend. I glanced back at the 2 individuals behind me, each holding a firearm and meeting my gaze directly. Your supervisor is requesting your presence, they inquired, tilting their heads toward a man engaged in an intimate act, raising a cup in my direction with a smile on his face. Certainly. I collected the 2 drinks from the table and proceeded towards the boss. This was merely a performance, as Wanda and I soon realized that simply moving from base to base became somewhat monotonous. In our pursuit of enjoyment, we decided that a bit of roleplay could enhance the experience for the next 3 minutes, and I also had the opportunity to enjoy a drink in a crime den. I will verify that again. I disregarded the crowd around me and the sudden silence in the room as I took my seat in front of the men who, at the very least, had the decency to maintain proper decorum. He will not receive any points. I have 2 inquiries. Can you please identify yourself and explain how you gained access to this location? He stated as he placed his firearm on the table while the others aimed their weapons at me. With a smooth motion, I turned the gun's nozzle away from me and placed the 2 glasses down in my hand. There are 2 responses, I suppose. A gentleman and I entered. The room became quiet as I sipped my cocktail, and just as the individual in charge was preparing to give the command to eliminate me, an unexpected splatter occurred on the ground, showering the others with a red, sticky substance. Before one of them could react, an individual seized his throat, resulting in a violent expulsion of blood and intestines onto his face, inducing a state of shock in the men. Be Baba Yaga. Wanda, that perspective is rather somber. Apologies. I was exploring a new approach. Understood. Proceed as you wish. Are you aware of the individual you are engaging with? I observed the visibly agitated supervisor who had a firearm directed at me. This warehouse is owned by the Kingpin. I chose to disregard him entirely and concentrated on my beverage. I was unable to discern the nature of the horror that Wanda was manifesting in their eyes, as I was employing my abilities to negate any illusions that might influence me. I do not particularly appreciate eldritch horrors. Those who were not impacted gathered in a corner, expressing their distress over the erratic behavior of those who were unfortunate. The situation became even more pronounced when they turned to my direction and observed the expressionless visage of a man enjoying a cocktail mix. In just a minute and a half, the entire cash house fell silent. I lifted the other glass and presented it to Wanda, who wore a subtle smile as she accepted it. That is one of my most polished pieces of work to date. She expressed her satisfaction while observing the pristine cash house behind us, devoid of any blood or damaged items. This kingpin. What is his situation? This is the third base we have assessed. Disregard him. He is merely a crime lord who has significant influence over numerous city officials, I stated while dismissing Wilson Fisk. I prioritized more pressing matters over attributing importance to the oversized boss baby. Do you have any other suggestions to consider? I believe I have reached my limit with crime hunting. If you are inquiring, there is an order of sorcerers that I believe we can consult to assist with your magic, or we can postpone that for another day. We could also visit the mutant school you expressed interest in exploring. I provided several suggestions as we exited the building in the same manner we entered. Indeed, the NYPD was poised for another demanding day ahead. Despite my diligent efforts to locate Sublime and Sinister, I was unable to uncover any leads regarding either of them. Both were immortal entities, one being a bacterium, known for its inclination towards covert manipulation, and a strong desire to complicate the lives of mutants. I have no interest in considering the possibility of them collaborating. Regrettably, my assessment indicated that there was an 83% likelihood of that outcome. Buckman continued to attempt to evade the numerous accusations directed at him by shifting the blame onto some of his associates. However, it took only a few moments for me to incorporate these elements into his eventual downfall, ensuring that the media had no alternative but to cover the story extensively, as his offenses extended beyond state boundaries to include several countries involved in his illicit operations. In my view, he was no longer present. Despite his attempts to evade the system by orchestrating a disappearing act following his incarceration, I maintained surveillance on him. Raven effectively portrayed Buckman's wife and was also providing Shaw with some encrypted messages from Buckman. Emma Frost had already gained complete control over all of Buckman's legal team, but that did not concern me. I am indifferent to the actions of both individuals regarding their growing power and influence, provided that these actions do not further harm society. The arrest of Buckman significantly disrupted numerous drug and illegal firearms operations along the East Coast. Furthermore, Mystique began receiving threats regarding the potential reopening of those docks once the case concluded. Regarding Shaw, although he did not lead numerous companies, he certainly held significant shares in various business conglomerates, including but not limited to Stark Industries, Hammer Technologies, Oscorp, and several of MS Enterprises, with the exception of Frost Pharmaceuticals. It appears that Emma ensured he held no authority within her company. Seeing the topics that are all over the headlines made me feel like I'm definitely on the right track. Rather than focusing on mutant hate propaganda and censored videos about mutant persecution, the conversation was actually about the crimes and inhumane actions of the country's elites. There are islands, secret research facilities, and even some public companies that conduct illegal experiments on mutants and humans. They definitely couldn't just ignore this situation, especially with so many people already out there with their placards and banners protesting in the streets. They can't even find the time to push the registration bill, let alone sanction heroes. Hey, it looks like there's some movement happening. I opened the sudden notification and was totally surprised to see the same biotechnological digital presence of the technopath who blocked me from getting Magneto's contact on Mystique's phone. Is Magneto on the move? It's something we saw coming, but honestly, it's not something we're happy about. Fingers crossed he's the kind of guy who can see things clearly. I get that the guy's a total villain, but you have to admit, the reason he went down that path was because of his fellow mutants. I really hope there's still a tiny bit of that pure passion tucked away in his cold iron heart. I really don't want an ego-driven Magneto messing up the plan I've got for the mutant community in this world. Just give him a light tracking. I'm curious about where his streams of data are headed. I want to keep an eye on everything they do online without them realizing I'm already interested. I'm curious to see what they're trying to achieve with all this sudden activity. After clearing the notification for the task I'm working on, I start to think about what to do next. My plan with the club is moving along nicely, and I'm keeping an eye on whatever Magneto is up to. Maybe I can finally shift some attention and get to work on one or two of those ideas I've been sitting on. Alright, let's go over everything I know about the quantum realm. I spent the next few hours going over everything I know and doing some calculations related to the topic we're discussing. Laura and Davis stopped by to see how I was doing, but I waved them off because I was really focused on something important. This topic is going to be super helpful for me, not just on a personal level but also for the portal station and planning. Unlike the watchtower from DC, I'm not planning to set up our base in the chilly vastness of space. I really enjoy the scenery down here. Thanks a lot. So, from what I gather, the quantum realm is this unique spot that connects both the physical and metaphysical sides of our entire multiverse. It's like its own reality where its rules and effects are way more powerful than those in any other universe. Because of that, it seems like I could tap into it to reach any point in our universe, especially with better accuracy here on Earth. Thor and the Raccoon, I used it to travel to Asgard in the Infinity War movie. Hey there. So, I totally can't recall the raccoon's name right now, and honestly, I'm feeling a bit too lazy to look it up. But you know what? That just means I've got a guaranteed pass for some deep space adventures and hopping through different universes. There might even be multiverses. The possibilities really seem endless when you think about the quantum realm. Hank Pym must have been in a wild place when he thought up the Pym particles, because the possibilities and the paths it opens up are definitely not what you'd come up with in a regular frame of mind. That guy must have been radiating something amazing in the 60s. From my own experiences, I really think the Pym particles are one of the coolest scientific marvels in any universe they pop up in. Oh no. Going over everything about the quantum realm got me thinking about Hank's wife, who's still missing in there, and it really brought to light the danger posed by Kong. If there's one person, besides Doom, that I really don't want to deal with until I sort out my energy deficiency, it's definitely Kong. And not just any Kong, I'm talking about Kong the Conqueror. The amount of technology available to them really makes them a pretty scary opponent. These guys have gone through several versions of the Avengers, Fantastic Four, and even the X-Men, so I'm definitely aware of the kind of threat Kang brings to the table. So, since I don't have a coordinate to navigate the quantum realm like Scott and the Pyms did in the movies thanks to my intervention that kept Scott from quantum diving to stop Darren Cross, you'll have to search for her manually. Fingers crossed I don't run into Kong, because if there's anyone who knows more about the Avengers, including me and all his other versions, as well as the Infinity Stones, it's definitely Kong. I'd bet my rare or ass on that one. Honestly, this whole thing is starting to feel like it has more downsides than it's worth. Even if I might be overreacting a bit, I still think there's a solid chance that it's not completely out of the question. For sure, it's not a good idea to get involved when there's an overlord who has a ton of conquered universes and is on the hunt to take over the multiverse or whatever their agenda is. Am I overreacting here, or what? Am I being too careful about Kong, maybe more than he deserves? When it comes to quantum diving, it's super important to be really careful, considering both the facts and some assumptions. It's really not a good idea to try to make contact with someone known as Kong the Conqueror. And there it is. This is truly one of the most humbling experiences I've had. It really highlights how dangerous this world can be. I haven't even met the guy, but the results from checking him out have really made me reconsider what I'm doing. The real issue isn't just the possibility of facing Kong, it's also that I'm Vision. Even though I know I'm not exactly what this Earth's Vision was meant to be, it doesn't really mean I'm all that different from other versions of Vision, especially when it comes to strength. I really hope I don't bump into that guy. I set aside my gloomy thoughts about Kong and concentrated on what I can control, and speaking of that. Ava Starr. Nickname Ghost. Affiliation Special Operative Agent for Cheel. Working area taking out targets and gathering intelligence. Special attributes Temporal imbalance molecular deconstruction. Just another one of Shield's many mistakes. From what I gathered from her profile on Shield's database and her foster dad, Bill Foster, it's pretty clear that she's running on empty and her molecules are breaking down super fast as long as she keeps using her powers. Temporal imbalance, huh? At the pace she's going, it seems like she'll eventually break down to the point of merging with the quantum realm. If that happens, it would probably erase her consciousness, since there's just no way her human brain can wrap itself around the vastness and oddities of the quantum realm. I think if I take some time to study her and what she can do, it might help me get a better grasp on the quantum realm and my own quantum shifting skills. I said as I got up and picked up the Mind Stone to run some tests on it. The stone felt heavy in my hands, and it began to flow through my body like a new bloodstream I had just created. I tossed my overcoat over my shoulder and strolled out of my workspace, ready to tackle a task I had in mind. Looks like it's time to have a chat with a ghost. Stay tuned for more. Thank you for watching this amazing video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel for more content. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.